Should you drop everything and move to Japan? Today we're going to find out. I'm going to cover all facets of life to consider when thinking of moving to a new country, and Japan in particular. By the end of this video, you'll have all of the info you need to take the next step on your journey to living in Japan, or deciding not to if that's the best option for you. A lot of this is going to be relative to where you're coming from. How satisfied are you with your current life? What are you looking to change? What's important to you? The goal of this video is to open your eyes to almost everything to consider before moving here. Interpretation will be left to you. Ton to consider here, so here's some of what I'll cover. Reasons for wanting to move to Japan, your situation, age, gender, personality, race, living conditions, finding community, religion, career and salary, public services and quality of life, future outlook, maybe some other things. Let's get started. Reasons for wanting to move to Japan. First thing to consider when thinking about moving to Japan is kind of meta. We're going to examine why we want to move here in the first place. Have you seen a lot of your favorite influencers in Japan and just thought it looks interesting? It's not necessarily a bad thing, but we need to dig in further to figure out what that means on a deeper level. Maybe you're just bored with your current life or where you live enough that anything out of the ordinary about Japan makes you want to uproot yourself and move. If that's the case, then maybe there are even better countries for you. I only know Japan, so you have to research those independently. But don't get stuck on Japan too quickly just because it was the first place to catch your eye. Do you have an interest in anime, manga, or video games and want to be closer to where it's made and really immerse yourself in that world? It's practically a trope at this point that Japan is not like anime, but actually I believe it's pretty similar in many senses. But if you're just considering moving here because you like anime and manga, it's very likely that you'd be better off just saving your time and money and enjoying Japanese culture in your home country. Maybe you could just vacation here every now and then. We'll explore this more later. Variation on this, though, that would be more valid would be something like being into idol culture or Japanese bands. You could enjoy them in your home country, but experiencing them in person would be much more exciting. Also, for the anime example, you could see the anime movies that you're interested in on the big screen, so there's a benefit, but is it something you'd love enough to move for? I'd guess not, but that's for you to decide. If you're interested in pop culture reasons like this, you'll find everything, media, goods, events, to be much cheaper here, with the huge caveat that everything will be in Japanese only, so you'll have to challenge yourself to learn the language well enough to enjoy it. Do you want to learn the language? This is by far the best reason for wanting to move to Japan, in my opinion. Reasons for wanting to learn Japanese aside, there's no better way to learn a language than to be immersed in it during your everyday life. Especially effective if you can keep yourself away from regularly communicating in your native language. You're typically not going to get this level of immersion from simply visiting Japan, as a tourist. But with this reason for moving to Japan, you'll probably not need to be here for the long term, so at some point your motivation for moving here will wear off, at which point you'll probably want to reevaluate your stay. If you're below N1, which would be most everyone watching this probably, you could study at a language school to force yourself to use only Japanese for a minimum of a few hours per day. I personally had a really good experience learning Japanese at a language school. This might have been because I wasn't around any other students that spoke English though. So with all of the friends I made, we had to speak Japanese as a bridge language. Food. Are you super into Japanese food? While Japanese food is available around the world in urban centers, the quality can vary widely. And if you haven't spent much time in Japan, you may be settling for food that is nothing like the original. On top of that, Japanese food will be much more expensive overseas, even with the lower quality. You need to be here if you like Japanese food. But unless you need it, 7 days a week, you might be fine just settling your cravings a couple of times per year if you can afford the trip. On the flip side though, if you care a lot about food, you have to consider the possibility that it may be difficult to find your home country's food here. If the food you're looking for isn't an international staple, say pasta or hamburgers for example, it may be tough to even find the ingredients for it. Myself, for example, coming from the southern USA, find myself craving Tex-Mex occasionally, but there are almost no restaurants that live up to my expectations here. No, Taco Bell is not even close. So I have to end up making it myself sometimes, which even then I have to go out of my way to find the ingredients. Countryside living. I think there are a ton of people that want to come to Japan and live in the countryside. They have a dream of buying an Akiya, fixing it up, and maybe living close to nature. I love being in nature occasionally, and I come from a rural town in the US, so I understand that. But I really can't imagine the isolation I would feel if I moved to a new country with no connections and live far away from people. So I can't give you much guidance on this reason. I guess you'll know if you're the kind of person that can stand that lifestyle. Probably need to work with a bilingual Japanese real estate agent who can guide you through the process as well. Your personal situation. So now that we've examined some reasons for wanting to come to Japan, we need to look at what type of person you are. I don't mean to deter anyone from living here unnecessarily, but who you are can significantly affect your decision to move here. The largest factor here is going to be age, I think. The younger you are, the less significant a misstep in moving can have on your life. So say you're 20 and you're wondering if moving overseas is a good choice for you. You have some savings set aside, but you just can't get yourself to make the jump. The worst case scenario, say you spend 2 years in Japan just to find out that it makes you miserable. You'll have time to recover and still have a fulfilling career in your home country. So you can go back to building up your savings there and it'll be like nothing ever happened within a few years, right? You'll have learned something about yourself, maybe the world, hopefully. If you have a good job in your home country though, and you're in the middle of your career already, you may have a harder time picking up where you left off if things don't go so well. So keep that in mind. Of course, if you're already in retirement, your concerns will be completely different and age goes back to not mattering as much. Gender. Time to get into a more touchy subject. If you're a man coming to Japan, you'll have some slight benefit of society still being set up as a somewhat patriarchal society. I know someone would say it heavily favors men, but reforms have been made and are being made to make Japan more similar to the West equality-wise. In any case, as a man, you won't have to deal with harassment as much as women will. If you're a woman living in Tokyo, unfortunately I find it unlikely that you won't experience harassment at some point if you live here long enough. I've heard enough stories from Japanese women in my life about being harassed. I think it's all too common, even from a fairly young age. It's kind of disturbing. For more details, you have to search out other people's videos. As a foreign woman, you may be more intimidating, so it may happen less, but at the same time, you will still stand out more, so you're a potential target. Now I'm wandering into territory far removed from my own experience, so let me know if I'm wrong in the comments, please. Some people may be wondering about LGBT stuff here in Japan and if you'll face any discrimination. Well, first of all, legally speaking, you cannot get married. Is this something that's important to you? Culture though, there's no religious stigma against being LGBT in modern times, significantly less than in the West even. So in that sense, Japan may be a haven for you. Any stigma against this would just be something occurring at an individual level. However, rarely does someone talk about their orientation in the workplace or in public with large groups of friends, for example. In this sense, you may feel stifled or like you're trying to hide who you are. On the other hand, I would say it's more common here to see like gay men or transgender people on primetime TV. Yes, they may be used as the butt of a joke sometimes, but these characters are widely beloved. One of my favorite TV personalities, Matsuko Deluxe, is a prime example of this type of figure. Frankly, I don't think Matsuko would be accepted on primetime TV in the West, and certainly would not have been many years ago when she first appeared on TV. I can't go much deeper on this because this is about the extent of my knowledge, but I just thought people may be surprised that there's less stigma than they thought about this in Japan. So I just wanted to, open your mind to it. Personality. How much you will enjoy living in Japan will definitely vary depending on your personality. Are you the type of person who has to voice their opinion on everything? In other words, do you have trouble holding your tongue? Life is going to be tough for you here if you're planning on working with Japanese people regularly. Of course, you could try to get into a good company where everyone's opinion's heard. That's not what I'm talking about. You need to be able to read the room and judge when your opinion would be helpful and when to defer to the group. On the other hand, if you're a more reserved person, you need to be more vocal to get your unique viewpoint as a foreigner heard in meetings, so you don't just get sidelined. Basically, you need to be well balanced in agreeableness and still assertive at the right times to have a good time working here. It may be useful in the West as well, but I would say doubly so here. Race. Fact is, you will fit in better if you're Asian, but you may have a harder time because depending on how you look, you might be assumed to be Japanese, and it'll be harder to convey that you don't speak Japanese. I've seen this from some of my Chinese friends, for example. Also, if you're European looking, you may receive better treatment than other races, unfortunately. It's hard to say because I've only experienced things in my shoes. You can look up other people's videos to figure out how your race may be perceived by society at large in Japan. What kind of place do you want to live? Do you need enough rooms for each activity in your daily routine, like a workout room, gaming room, office, living room, etc.? You'll be hard-pressed to find a spacious place if you're living in Tokyo, assuming you're not very wealthy. The same goes for like a garden or even just a patch of grass large enough to sit on. Within the wards of Tokyo, you're going to need some serious cash. Tokyo does have more affordable housing than many places in the West, despite what you may see online, but the standards of living and expectations for space, privacy, quietness, they're all different here. So if you're adaptable, you might have a good time, but there are some serious trade-offs to living in a Japanese neighborhood. I'm only familiar with the greater Tokyo metropolitan area, so if you live outside of that, tell me what your experience with housing has been. If you want to live outside of Tokyo, of course, there are going to be larger places to live for more affordable prices, but they still won't compare to homes in the USA, for example. And you'll be sacrificing a lot of the walkability of living in Japan. For me, that's a big attraction to living here in the first place, so it's kind of out of the question. Coming from the USA, there are going to be quite a few creature comforts too that you'll have to give up if you're renting a place at least. There won't be central heating outside of Hokkaido. There won't be a dishwasher. You'll have to separate your trash. I know this may be better for the environment, but still it's a pain. You won't have a dedicated clothes dryer, so your laundry situation depends on the weather. You won't have an oven. They're all small things by themselves, but they make for some discomfort when you move here. And eventually you'll probably get used to these things and find workarounds to make life better. Also, these things can be taken care of with enough money, but these problems are the norm. are the community. There's going to be a larger barrier to surrounding yourself with a good community in Japan than in your home country. Language is of course the largest barrier, but even if you were 100% fluent in Japanese, moving to a new country means you're starting your social circle from zero. Everyone is born into some sort of social life, Most of us have never had to even think of our minimal social circle. You're surrounded by family from birth, you're sent to school where you naturally make friends at a young age. Hopefully you hold on to some of those friends, or at least you keep making new ones along the way. But you're kept within predefined, inherently social activities that set you up with tons of opportunities to meet people. When you move to a new country, or Japan, you have to set up everything for yourself, and events that you go to might be a mixed bag. You might want to do a sport that you did back home, but everyone there is at a way different stage of life than you. Sure, you can be friends with them, but it's harder to meet people around your age that you actually want to be friends with. And while we're on the subject of community, if you practice some religion or belief system that involves community in your home country, you may have a harder time finding a community to fit in with here. The more urban an area that you live in, the more groups you'll find of any kind, of course. But just realize you're going to be in the minority. So your options will likely be much slimmer here if you practice anything other than some Japan-based religion. I say Japan-based because even if you're a Buddhist, Japanese practices may be much different than what you're used to. Aside from the community you find, society at large is structured around the assumption that most people are Shinto or Buddhist, so you may have to go out of your way to avoid other religious practices. For example, for New Year's at my workplace, everyone got together and went to a shrine for Hatsumode, which is the first visit to a shrine in the year. Line up at a temple, throw your money into the box and say a prayer. If you ask most Japanese people, they wouldn't even think of this as a religious practice. It's just something they do every year as a tradition. But from the outside, it's pretty clear that it's tied up in religion, and it would be hard to argue that it's strictly secular if you're saying a prayer. Of course, you could decline invitations to that kind of event, but then you'd probably have to explain why, and it may be a hassle. Salary and career. How much potential does your career have in your home country? It's no secret that salaries for equivalent positions will often be lower than in countries in the West, and it can be harder to advance your career without putting in some time. I, for example, work as a software developer. I could be making a lot more money if I were living in the US and earning there. All things considered, I think my prospects are good enough in Japan, and considering other quality of life things, I want to be here long term. This math might work out differently for your industry though. Would you be okay working for a Japanese salary for the next chunk of your life? Brings me to my next point. Would you be okay earning in Japanese yen, even though the yen may never recover to its previous exchange rate? Currently, with the yen being so weak, traveling back overseas after earning money in Japan can be surprisingly expensive. If you were to withdraw all of your savings from Japan and move your yen to USD, at the time of making this video, the value would go down roughly by 45%, which is an insane drop. But one distinction I want to make here is that this doesn't have near as much of an effect on your day-to-day life within Japan as you may think. For example, rent has not risen much, if any, and the only prices that have gone up are for goods that are imported or made primarily with imported things. So basically, if you're earning within Japan and spending within Japan, you'll be fine. But if you're earning within Japan and planning to move back someday in the future, you need to expect your savings to be much lower than they would be if you were earning in your home country, if your currency is stronger than the yen. Work culture. Also, the work culture here is very different in many ways. I work as a software engineer, like I said, and I'm in a much more progressive workplace that is probably more similar to Western companies than a typical Japanese company. But if you're in a large legacy company or any place with a bunch of older people, you may have a hard time adjusting to a work environment that doesn't mesh well with foreigners. Check out my other video on work culture in Japan for more about this. Raising children. When you're considering your career, you also need to be thinking if your salary is going to be enough to raise children here. Living in Tokyo, you're going to need more space if you want to have a couple of children. That means more money and housing costs. You may not even find a home big enough to accommodate family life for you, so you might need to move to the outskirts of Tokyo. Are you going to be able to commute every weekday or find a remote job? Like in any country, having children turns up the difficulty in life. In a lot of Tokyo, I feel like I barely even see younger children around. I think most families have their life outside of the city and just use the city for work and play. Of course, younger people live there, but the logistics get too difficult too fast in Tokyo. For example, when your child needs to be pushed around in a stroller, are you going to be able to get onto the crowded trains? Maybe you'll be able to squeeze in, but then you'll have to make long treks through the subway stations to find each elevator to go up and down each level, while other people just hop on an escalator. At the same time, taking a car everywhere in Tokyo would be an expensive and slow process a lot of the times anyways. It's not a great option either. Is your child going to be bullied or feel like an outsider? I know that there are a lot of children that were raised in Japan that were treated differently or bullied. If your kids are in a school where they stick out, they are likely to experience some sort of discrimination or at least isolation throughout their education. Is this something you're okay with? Care for your child? You'll probably want to prevent or change this. But the reality is there's little you can do if the school they're attending isn't very small or in a tight, close-knit community. Personally, I'm planning to send my child to an international school so we can avoid these issues, but that comes with a cost, so you'll have to weigh your options. Public services, quality of life, miscellaneous. How affordable is healthcare in your home country? Here it's government subsidized and fairly affordable. How's your public transportation? Here you can get to much of the country by train, though outside of more populated regions you'll be inconvenienced by not having a car. How safe's your country? Is there theft, violence? Can you be outside at any time and feel safe? For me, all of these quality of life things add up to make continuing to live in Japan a no-brainer. With all things considered, Japan to me just feels more centered and like a human-friendly place to live, if that makes any sense. One of the bad things of life that gets talked about a lot, though, is the bureaucracy associated with doing anything, even slightly official here. There's this trope about everything needing tons of paperwork and needing to be done exactly by the book. Well, there being paperwork for most everything is true, but I find bureaucrats to be much more flexible than I expected. There have been like several occasions where I was supposed to have proof of address, proof of employment, etc., but I just didn't have it ready, and the people just took my word for it and filed things anyway. I'm talking about city hall, police stations, that kind of thing. So I think the system may be more flexible than you think. Now, if it was because I was an American, because I spoke fluent Japanese, or maybe I was being positively profiled, I can't say, but I was pleasantly surprised. Another bad thing would be how you may be treated just going about your daily life. Even though the vast majority of my daily life I don't face negative discrimination, one thing that bums me out is when I get away from the city and suddenly I feel like a complete outsider. And I don't mean I just feel that way, I mean I'm treated differently. The further from the city you go, the more you'll experience people treating you differently, saying random inappropriate things to you, making random jokes to their friends about you, either in English or Japanese. You all may have thicker skin than me, but where I come from, no one even derides anyone, even playingly, so it kind of bums me out when strangers do it. I don't go home and sulk on it or anything, it just kind of makes me, sad for a bit. I'm sure most people don't mean anything too bad by it, but it's like you're just an animal or something to them, not a person. Not trying to be overly dramatic, but that's the best way I can describe it. It helps to have self-confidence, like I know my life is going better than this person, but if your life wasn't, that may be extra rough. Future outlook. While life in Japan might be great for you now, how do you see it 10 years from now? I'm not talking about how your relationship with Japan will change. I mean, as a country, what do you think it'll be like? It's widely known that Japan's at the beginning of a demographic crisis with the population set to decline rapidly. Do you think that this society will continue to function efficiently? The yen's currently very weak due to the central bank's policies. Do you have confidence that they'll be able to keep the country afloat? In other words, things are scheduled to get worse before they get better. If they ever get better within the next couple hundred years, it's anybody's guess. Even though I have little confidence in the government's ability to improve things, my own view is that as long as I keep growing in my personal life that offsets the deteriorating conditions here, I'll be fine. But not everyone will want to put that pressure on themselves, I think. For each section we covered, let's assign a score with how well you resonate or side with Japan. We'll rate them 1 to 10. Reason for wanting to move to Japan? Do you have a strong reason in the first place? How many points out of 10? About you? Would you be able to fit in or come to terms with how society views you? Personality fit? Are you agreeable enough to fit in? Are you outgoing enough to speak up? Community. Will you be able to make friends? This goes with personality. Raising children. Will you be able to give a good life to your children while not sacrificing your quality of life or reasons for moving to Japan in the first place? Public services, quality of life. How do Japan's public services compare to your home countries? Career and salary. What's your career potential in Japan? Could you make the salary you would need in the long term? Or can your career recover from a short stint in Japan if you're young? Future mobility. Would you be able to move elsewhere in the future with ease? Just in case. Do you have a backup plan? Not necessarily required, but good to have. There's a total of 85 points, or 75 if you don't plan on having children. I won't give a method to weigh and measure your total score. List all these items out on a piece of paper and consider the whole by yourself. So after all of this is said and done, what if you're pretty sure that you want to move here, but the commitment is just too large? If you're young enough, you just need to be more decisive. You'll have time to make up for most mistakes you can make, and you're going to learn something about yourself either way. With that said, you can come to Japan as a tourist and treat your 3-month stay as if you're actually living here. Going through most apartment companies, you won't be able to get a rental for just 3 months, but for some foreign-friendly companies like Leo Palace, for example, short-term furnished rentals. Or you can look at online marketplaces where people rent out a house that they have as individuals. I personally found short-term rentals on here before that were dirt cheap and extremely old, but Japanese proficiency is an absolute must for these sites. Please don't go messaging them with machine translation and make it harder for foreigners who actually need these sites. When you're here during your 3-month vacation/trial run, try to do everything as you normally would if you lived here. If you're going to be working, make yourself work at home for however many hours per day. Spend the rest of your time running to get groceries, going out to make friends, learning Japanese, etc. Hopefully after 3 months, you have an idea of what life would actually be like here, and you'll be ready to either put Japan behind you for a while or make a longer-term commitment to life here. I think I missed a lot of things. Tell me if I missed anything. Tell me what else you want to know about. Subscribe so you can see follow-up stuff.